Hello and welcome to Bengal Bites, a podcast about the Cincinnati Bengals from a honest, realistic perspective. I'm your host, Derek. This is episode 110. This is the episode where Christmas and Thanksgiving and every other holiday mixed into one came early this year in 2025, just when it seemed like the season was on its last legs. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, Joe Burrow is back at Bengals practice this week before a pivotal game 2 rematch against the Pittsburgh Steelers, this time in Pittsburgh. We'll have plenty of time to preview that upcoming game, but this episode is going to be mostly dedicated to the biggest story in Bengals fandom in months, because it's been about a little bit over 7 weeks since Joe Burrow had surgery on his left big toe. He went into great detail with the media in an interview that was all over. If you're a big Bengals fan, I suggest you go and check it out on any of the different platforms. It was all over YouTube and TV, and everybody's doing a breakdown of it. So I won't bore you with the details of that, but everybody was excited about this. Just seeing Joe Burrow back in front of the microphone, back in front of the camera is the other thing, because he's got that $1 million smile. His hair is going a little bit crazy these days. When I saw him on the sideline with that crazy, he hasn't gotten a haircut basically, and he's just letting it go. And I thought he looked like J.J. McCarthy last season when the Vikings quarterback was out with a torn meniscus, and he had his hair going all shaggy. This is kind of what Joe Burrow is looking like. It's a different look. I don't know if it's a fashion decision or if it's just his psychology right now, or whatever mode he's in, but Joe Burrow is going through this rehab after surgery, and he talked about how it's a ligament injury, and unfortunately he knows way too much about ligament injuries. As we know, in his rookie year, he had multiple knee ligaments torn against the Washington franchise. And then 2 years ago, 2023, against the Ravens, he had that right wrist ligament injury that required surgery and kept him out for the rest of that season. Now he's been dealing with a toe ligament injury. The reporters asked him if he's been running, and he said that he has been running. He's able to throw, and there was even some video. It's not just him saying it. They showed him when the reporters were able to go into the practice on Monday. They showed Joe Burrow standing. It was interesting. Joe Flacco, the guy who's been starting for the last few weeks and has that right shoulder injury, he was not in pads. He was watching Joe Burrow do the throwing in practice. And so Burrow's still able to throw because most of his power is coming from his right foot, which is the uninjured foot. And he talked about how he's got some kind of special shoe and support around that left toe, which is his front toe. So you can kind of imagine like a pitcher in baseball, when they're driving off of the mound, that would be Joe's right foot in the same situation. So his left foot is the one that's kind of up in the air most of the time. It's not that big a deal for throwing, but like he said in the interview, it is an issue for when he tries to scramble and get side out of the pocket, use his athleticism, which is a big part of Joe Burrow's game. And that's exactly the type of play where Joe Burrow got injured. When he was trying to dance around inside the pocket, his foot got caught on that artificial turf, and he's going to instinctively want to try to do very similar movements like that when he goes back in. And I think this is now 53 days since he's had that surgery. I think initially they said the recovery time was about 3 months, and I'm sure Joe Burrow has the best surgeons and the best rehab people in the world working on his body to get him back into performance shape as quickly as possible. He came into this season, talked about being in the best shape of his life, and he had done so much to get ready for this season. He wanted this to be his best season of them all because last year he put up great numbers, but he didn't get the accolades that he was looking for, and the team didn't have the success that he wanted. And he won that Comeback Player of the Year award because he had so many great statistics, but he wanted this year to be like his MVP season. Obviously, that has been derailed at this point. And taking a step back for a moment, even if Joe Burrow doesn't play, it's going to be good to just generate some kind of interest in this Bengals franchise. They were teetering on irrelevancy for the rest of this season. When they put up the playoff picture graphic, Bengals aren't on that graphic anywhere yet. They're kind of down there with teams like the Dolphins, and even the Jets got their second win in a row. After beating the Cincinnati Bengals, they were infused full of confidence, so much so that they traded away Quinnen Williams and Sauce Gardner. They kept Justin Fields in at quarterback, and he didn't look any better in the win, but it was the special teams that won the game for the Jets over the Browns. I didn't know who to root for in that game. That was a weird game, but the Jets had 2 kick returns for touchdowns. They had a punt return and a kick return for a touchdown. Justin Fields had like 55 yards passing, and 40-something of them came all on a screen pass to Breece Hall where Justin Fields just got the ball out of his hands. It looked like almost a backwards lateral. The ball didn't go downfield. But anyway, this isn't a Jets podcast, but the Jets won. The Dolphins won. Teams that were down near the bottom are like slowly catching back up to the Bengals, is my point. And the Steelers lost their last game. So the Ravens are winning. They were 1-5. Now they're 4-5. They won 3 games in a row and have eclipsed the Bengals already. And so Bengals are in 3rd place in the AFC North division, but the Steelers only have 5 wins, and they're leading the division. Ravens have 4 wins. Bengals have 3 wins. They're 3-6 with 8 games remaining. If they go to 3-7 or even 3-8, the chances of making the playoffs become very unlikely. Joe Burrow acknowledged that he thought 10 wins in any given season was about the benchmark you want to have to make it to the playoffs. At 3-6, they would have to go 7-1 to get to 10 wins this season. That's a pretty tall task, especially considering Joe Burrow's coming back off of surgery. Joe Flacco's got a shoulder injury, and Jake Browning has been Jake Browning. And Joe Burrow also acknowledged that he didn't commit to coming back and playing this season. He said, we'll see how it goes over the next couple weeks. And they asked him, does wins and losses for the team and how the team's doing? And he said, we'll see. He didn't give him a yes or no answer. So it's not 100% that he is going to play again this season in a game, but he's out on the practice field with the team. They're leaving themselves that option. And from a business perspective, this is good for the Bengals. The last few games we've seen at the Bengals home games at Paycor Stadium, a huge turnout by the other team. And fans leaving early, even when the Bengals were about to win, the stadium was half empty because everybody pieced out when they thought Bengals went down by 3 touchdowns. Bengals ownership, they don't want to make any drastic moves like firing anybody or making any changes, it seems like, on the defensive coaching staff. Lots of teams around the NFL are making coaching changes. We've seen Dan Campbell, the head coach of the Lions, took over offensive play calling duties from his offensive coordinator, John Morton. And they were playing the Washington Commanders with Marcus Mariota, the backup quarterback, at quarterback. And so it was kind of a lesser opponent to get started to make Dan Campbell look pretty good. But they scored like 44 or something like that. They had over 500 yards. Everybody's putting up 500 yards. So the Bengals aren't the only team giving up 500. Commanders have a lot of injuries, and they're the oldest team in the NFL. And so it's kind of not a surprise. When you get old, I mean, hey, take it from me. When you get old, those injuries pile up, and you don't just snap back the next day. I'm finding that out as I try to, they say, use it or lose it. And I'm just trying to maintain right now. Joe Burrow is a young man, though. Hopefully he can snap back a lot quicker than I would from this kind of toe turf injury. But he even talked about the mental aspect. And I must mention before this episode is over, Marshawn Nealon, the Dallas Cowboys player who unfortunately took his own life. His family alerted police that he was having suicidal thoughts, and he took his own life. And I don't know any of the circumstances around that, but it should go as a reminder, and fans shouldn't forget the immense pressure and scrutiny these players are under. So we hear about players getting horrible messages through social media, threats, a lot of times from people who are gambling and have probably, who knows what kind of mental state they're in when they're sending these type of messages to the players. But we've seen players getting death threats or saying, "Oh, I hope you die because you made the play or you didn't make the play that cost me money," or whatever. So let's remember what all these players are going through, including Joe Burrow. Even though, yes, he does get paid a lot of money for this profession that he has chosen, it's not easy for him or anybody to get up there like Joe Burrow had to do and answer questions about what was his mental state and what was he feeling and thinking about when he had this injury. He said he pretty much knew immediately that it was going to be a serious long-term injury as soon as it happened. But he said he was going through those emotions mostly alone. Everybody deals with emotions differently, and Joe Burrow kind of withdrew, it sounds like, and wanted to be alone with his thoughts. And so he talked about being sad and frustrated and disappointed, and he mentioned grieving, which was an interesting way to put it, like almost feeling like, a loss that he was going through. And you can understand that. Like, think about all the time and effort that he spent preparing for this season, coming into it, and then to have it end after only 1.5 games. That couldn't have sat well with him. But it's going to be a question, because with the other quarterback in the upcoming game, Aaron Rodgers, we can see what it's like when a quarterback is out there who can't move very well. The Aaron Rodgers, when you watch him playing up against the Chargers, which a game that they lost again, it was mostly due to the fact that Aaron Rodgers didn't play very well. And we know the Steelers are kind of shaky on defense as it is, but Aaron Rodgers was like throwing balls in self-defense so he could avoid taking hits. And there was a safety that he took where he foolishly, I guess he didn't want to get called for intentional grounding, but he tried to escape from Khalil Mack. And obviously that's not going to happen at this age. Khalil Mack is, and Aaron Rodgers, the athleticism, the speed, the explosiveness just isn't there for A-Rod anymore. And so he got like strip sacked in the end zone. Wasn't a good play. And then he's just kind of forcing balls to DK Metcalf because he doesn't have a lot of other good options out there except for his tight ends. Although I've seen Darnell Washington, number 80 for the Steelers, that huge tight end who looks like a converted tackle. Like Aaron Rodgers, he's got that quick release he's known for. He just gets the ball in his hand, the ball's out immediately. But Darnell Washington was so slow to get out of his break on this play down by the end zone. It hit him right in the chest, but he wasn't looking for it yet. So Aaron Rodgers is beating this guy up with the football, but he's not on the same page. If Darnell Washington and Aaron Rodgers ever get on the same mental wavelength, they would be unstoppable because nobody can guard Darnell. And that's why Aaron Rodgers is trying to give him the ball, but he's just huh? What? I don't know. It's weird. But that's why this game against the Steelers is so critical for this season, not just for the team, but for whether or not Joe Burrow will come back. But part of it is, keeping the team and this franchise relevant, especially because they're playing on Thanksgiving in Baltimore. And Joe Burrow acknowledged that that's one of the things that he's kind of had as a goal in his mind. That's going to be on the 27th, which is from this recording about 16 days from now. That would put him, I don't know how many days that would be, almost 70 days, so 10 weeks from the surgery, which was not crazy, but definitely quicker than expected return. People were talking about maybe he could return in December, but if he could make it back before then, that would be a surprise. But he doesn't necessarily have to play. They could just put him on the roster and have him be like a backup. And still, if Joe Flacco is playing well and if his shoulder is able to hold up, that's the thing, is Joe Flacco has been dealing with that AC joint sprain in his right throwing shoulder, and he's apparently been having to get multiple injections, like going in, getting injected before the game and then again at halftime. And some people were saying maybe that was why he couldn't put much into the final throw of the game, the Hail Mary, because maybe that shot was wearing off and the pain was starting to come through. Which, how long, like I said, how effective is that going to be? Like constantly getting painkillers, that can't be good for you. And, Joe Flacco's got to live the rest of his life with his 5 children. He can't be not able to pick up his kids or do whatever with the kids because he's got a horrible injury. So for his sake, I hope that, it's not an easy position for the Bengals to be in at the quarterback position right now. But somehow this is the return of Joe Burrow to the practice field was also supposed to give a boost to the defense somehow. I don't understand how that would work because Joe Flacco is playing just as good as Joe Burrow was. He threw for 470 yards, but they're team captain. He's back with us. Joe Burrow doesn't play defense. He can't make tackles for them, especially not with a bum toe. I don't know. They talked about how Joe Burrow could go into the film room with some of the defensive backs and talk to them about what offenses want to do and that kind of stuff. But having Joe Burrow back isn't going to fix one of the key flaws of this Bengals team, which has been defense. They're last in the NFL in yards allowed, last in the NFL in rushing yards allowed, third to last in passing yards allowed, and last in the league in points allowed. Those are all very important categories, and at this pace, the Bengals may break records because the season is now one game longer at 17. They may have a chance to give up the most points ever and most yards ever by a team. Although with the kickoffs, maybe the yards wouldn't be there, but the points, they may give up the most points ever. And Zach Taylor has not made any changes so far. He said no changes are going to be made. You can't just make change for the sake of making change because people on the outside want you to make change. and he's just going to stay the course because he believes in all of the coaches, and they're all great coaches and very smart, and they're all working hard. And I don't doubt any of that, except for the fact that he says, on the one hand, you can't just change things just to change them. But then at the end of last season, they fired Lou Anarumo, the former defensive coordinator. And the reason that Zach gave was, I just felt like we needed to change. So he's kind of hypocritical in that sense, where not even a year ago he needed to change just to make a change. But now we don't need to make any changes, even though we have the last place defense in the entire league, and they're the reason why we're 3-6. But it was crazy that the Bengals had this bye week. I had a chance to watch other teams more in depth, so I wasn't focused on the Bengals. I had a chance to watch other teams, and hopefully the Bengals, especially the Bengals defense, got a chance to watch other defenses play, because when I watch other teams, and especially the other teams' linebackers, they're flying around, hitting guys, making tackles all over the place. Just not what we're seeing out of the Bengals defense, especially at the linebacker position. They got a couple new guys. They signed a free agent, Brian Asamoah, and a couple other guys, Liam Anderson maybe. And so we'll see, they're going with the youth movement. They traded away Logan Wilson to the Cowboys. Kind of perfect timing that the Cowboys also had a bye week, same week as the Bengals. It worked out for both of them. And apparently Logan Wilson had a trip to Disney World planned during the bye week with Evan McPherson, but then he got traded, so he probably couldn't go to Disney World while he's trying to move to Dallas and figure that whole situation out and get up to speed with the new NFL team. So that kind of, but he was the one who requested the trade. So this is what Logan Wilson wanted. It's going to be interesting to see how he performs, because Logan Wilson was benched in Cincinnati, which I mentioned is the last place defense in the NFL. So if he theoretically wasn't good enough to help the worst defense in the NFL, would he help the Cowboys? But the Cowboys have the 31st, second to last defense. Who knows what deficiencies they've got going on. So we'll be keeping an eye on that, just like we kind of kept an eye on Jesse Bates and saw how he's performing in Atlanta. But it's so easy for everybody to criticize the Bengals on, oh, they let this player go and they let that player go, and then they had, great careers with other teams. Like Justin Smith, went to the 49ers and was like a Hall of Famer. But they, don't give credit to guys like, nobody ever complains about, oh, they let CJ Uzama go. Like nobody is ever worried about that. It's kind of just how the business goes. And we have to remember that these players, the teams treat them just kind of like chess pieces on a strategy board, a playing piece. And the New York Jets, they just traded away their 2 Pro Bowl players for a ton of draft picks. And the GM mentioned how, that's general manager for Bengals fans who didn't realize teams had that sort of position. But the Jets GM talked about how they intentionally made the contract of those players tradable. So they had trading them in mind. Oh, we're going to send you off to another city and you're going to have to move your whole family, children, wife, whatever. I don't know what teams do to accommodate players in that regard, but it can't be easy to uproot your whole life and go work for basically another company. Imagine if you were working in your town, wherever you are right now, and then the company said, we're going to trade you to a competitor and you're going to move across to like the other side of the country and good luck. That would be insane, but that's what these players have to go through. So now that the trade deadline has passed, Trey Hendrickson is not going anywhere, but he is doubtful going into this game. It doesn't sound like he's going to practice, probably won't play. Even that bye week wasn't enough time for Trey Hendrickson's back, hip, whatever it is, to get healed up. Shamar Stewart, first-round rookie in the draft, is also sounding week to week with a knee injury. We'll have to watch that and see if he's able to practice at all. But if they're down Trey Hendrickson and Shamar Stewart, they're going to be real thin along the defensive line. Knowing that, I wouldn't be surprised if the Steelers try to attack the Bengals defensively by running the ball. Especially because Aaron Rodgers hasn't had a lot of success throwing this season. I think the Bengals are very susceptible to the run. I mean, they've given up over 250 yards rushing in back-to-back games. So anybody should be planning for running against the Bengals at this point. Bengals are going to have to find a way to tackle them, but without, new players, I don't know what they're going to do. These current players through the first 9 games haven't shown a lot of ability or really athleticism. A lot of these guys just aren't as good as athletes as the other team. And that's not their fault. That's mostly the fault of the people or person who picked out the players. But there's nothing we can do about that now. The draft has come and gone. Free agency has come and gone. These are the players that they have. So they just have to do their best at this point. I don't know how that's going to work. But we'll get into that on the next episode. Like I said, this is just an episode to talk about mostly Joe Burrow because he's back. It's exciting. There's new life pumped into this season that was mostly dead. So it's cold outside. It's unseasonably cold. There's snow outside. I can't wait. The Bengals have mostly had good weather. They've been very lucky in getting no rain or any precipitation in any of their games in like the last 2 seasons pretty much. Pretty much that Browns game was the only one I can think of. But they've had like even unseasonably warm games in Cincinnati. And as the temperature drops, that's one of the first things that's going to get stiff is your toes. Think about that. Your body, if you're out in the cold weather, your toes usually are the first thing that get cold and stiff, which is not good if you're coming off toe surgery. So how is Joe Burrow going to react in that type of weather? That remains to be seen. But for now, it's definitely not Joe Burrow. Zach Taylor made that very clear. He's not going to be playing this week. It's going to be hopefully Joe Flacco and probably Jake Browning as the backup. No Joe Burrow, but he's just returning to practice, seeing how things go. Hopefully everything goes fine. He doesn't want to have any setbacks. But it's just another reminder of how injuries can really affect a player and their career. And I want Joe Burrow to have the longest career possible, but all these injuries keep piling up that just in the long term, it's going to inevitably, limit what he can do. These injuries don't make him a better player. All of these injuries are kind of taking a little bit off of his maximum potential, which is unfortunate. So that's why I don't want this to turn into anything worse. If he needs to shut it down for the season, absolutely shut it down. But just the fact that he's out there, hopefully that gives the team and this fan base a little bit of a boost. Hopefully this podcast has given you a boost of energy, or maybe it made you fall asleep. Either way, it kind of works. I like listening to podcasts that are like really energetic in the morning to get me going, but then like the more relaxed podcast to kind of chill out at night. So either way, if it makes you fall asleep, don't listen to this podcast where you're driving or operating heavy machinery. But we're going to come back in the next episode and do a full preview of the Week 11 game against the Steelers when we know more information, see some more interviews from players and coaches. But until next time, I'm going to leave you with a hooday and stay hungry for more Bengal Bites.
you.